Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Healing Brain. This is our weekly webinar and podcast here at Doman International, where parents with children with special needs join us from around the world and ask us their biggest and most important questions, and we do our best to answer it. I am Spencer Doman. I'm the director of Doman International. Doman International is a nonprofit organization that coaches warrior parents of children with special needs with holistic solutions for their children. I'm joined today by Dr. Aravind Bagade. Dr. Aravind is the Director of Nutrition and Health at Doman International, and I'm really glad to have him joining us today to talk about an important topic, which is what are the top 5 lab tests that we recommend for special needs children. I'm also joined by my colleague, Colleen Hudson, who's the Director of Representatives. She is the first person in the organization to speak to parents who want to learn more about the Doman Method. Dr. Aravind, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Spencer. Thanks for inviting me, and welcome to all parents.
So maybe we could start first with talking about lab testing in general. Why does Doman International recommend lab testing for virtually every child on our program?
Very good question, because many of these problems related to neurodevelopmental challenges, it will have a multitude of factors. It is multifactorial, not just one system, but many systems are involved. And many times it can start from an impaired gut health or microbiome diversity. It can also be a genetic factor related. There can be environmental triggers, there can be dietary triggers, and there can be also nutrient related problems, which is worsening or posing an ongoing challenge to neurodevelopment. So until and unless we test, we'll not have an idea of what's going on physiologically, and we will just be shooting in the dark, just treating symptoms. So it's very important to test and treat. So we will know what's going on in each system and then plan the therapies accordingly.
Perfect. And out of interest, I've never asked you this question before. How often do you recommend testing for a child and everything comes back completely normal?
Very rare.
Very rare, yeah.
I personally feel that we need some baseline testing, especially with blood work, to see how things are, and then we'll go into the depths of the specific problem the child has, and every time we will find a new input that's going to help us. For example, we might suspect that there is some problem with the liver functions, something, and we do blood test. It comes back normal, but it also gives us a hint that the specific issue the child is facing is not basically from liver, but it may be due to the probiotic concentration being very less. So even in the normal tests, it is going to give us a hint about something else to probe, and that has been very helpful.
Got it. And so when I know it completely depends on the findings of the test, but what are the different things that might be adapted or changed in a child's life based on testing? Is it just diet? Is it just supplements? What are some of those things that might change?
Many things. Diet and supplements are just a part of it. But for example, we also do testing in relation to blood gases and electrolytes, like the metabolic panel. So it gives us a relative idea of whether some child is having blood gas variations with oxygen and carbon dioxide, what kind of a rehab program is suited for this child, and what should not be done, what can harm the child than benefiting it, or what's the threshold of a particular child in doing specific rehab programs. And it is also going to give us an idea of environmental factors like air pressure or humidity and many other aspects, which can come into play in managing maybe hyperactivity, seizures, sleep-related issues, which are never, usually tested. Nobody will think that, okay, a metabolic panel can give an answer. It's only accidental discovery that will get to know certain things. And that gives a lot more information on how to modify the child's living area, whether if air quality is affected, how do we improve it? If humidity is affecting, how do we improve it? So there are a lot of factors that can depend on the testing, which we can change and help the child in better development.
Yeah, and I appreciate you noting that testing doesn't just tell us what to add. Sometimes it tells us what needs to be stopped. And I'll see that sometimes in your feedback or other nutritionists' feedback with our families. It might say, for your child, based on this lab testing, we need to decrease physical activity, or based on your child's findings, we need to stop this food, or your child actually should not be getting this specific supplement because your child doesn't need this. So that can be very helpful.
Yeah, and even respiratory programs, like if there is too much of variation in the CO2, O2 levels, and the child is already, having hypercapnic episodes, or some children, because of anxiety, they are also going to hyperventilate a lot. So what sort of a respiratory program can worsen the anxiety spells? So we get a lot of information from tests.
Great. Well, thank you. Let's jump into these tests one by one for everyone joining us late. We're talking about the top 5 lab tests for special needs children that we use here at Doman International. Let's start with number 1, which is just the routine blood test. So why do you find the routine blood test helpful? Why is it? I notice it's very often the first thing we'll request from families when they come for their first appointment. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a little bit invasive, but it gives us a baseline idea of how the entire system is. For example, just imagine that a child is born with a diagnosis of cerebral palsy or something like that. And the parents usually do not take the child out on a daily basis. So, they'll keep the child at home, protect, because the child may be prone to seizures. There can be other feeding issues, many things. And they might have modified the feed based on what the child can tolerate. And maybe at the age of 1 or 1.5 years, maybe 2 years of age, they come to Doman International. And when we do the routine labs, we will find that there are a lot of nutritional deficiencies, not because the parents didn't do a good nutrition program, but we don't know what the body is asking for. And there can be things like vitamin D deficiency, B12 is very low, because usually kids with, so I'm just taking a cerebral palsy as a prototype to just give an example. They are usually given proton pump inhibitors for acid reflux and spasticity, so that they can sleep through the night. That leads to secondary B vitamin deficiency, mineral deficiencies. And that will in turn lead to problems with neurochemicals and seizures. So when they come with seizure history, just giving magnesium won't help them, because there is already a lot of deficiencies we need to address. So this baseline testing will help us know what is the current status and plan the nutrition based on it. So it basically includes complete blood count, all the different cellular components of the blood. It has thyroid panel, checks for the thyroid stimulating hormone, the free T3, T4. It also checks liver functions, liver enzymes, renal functions, the electrolytes and metabolic panel, and routine urinalysis and stool examination. Maybe the child is having seizures because the child is anemic, the child is losing blood in stools. We see occult blood many times. Maybe there are parasites, or there is intestinal inflammation, or there can be dysbiosis. Due to many reasons, the gut might also lose blood in stools. There can be absorption issues, because there may be problems with microbiome diversity. So the initial nutrition program is completely dependent on the lab tests, because if it says that there is like a microcytic blood picture, the entire nutrition program will not just be an elimination diet. It will be a replacement diet with the foods that we don't want to the foods that can help the child, maybe including more iron rich foods, or adding ingredients that can improve iron and other nutrient absorption. So it's not a generalized nutrition program. It becomes very specific when we do the lab test, and it can help us lay a strong foundation on which we can plan further rehab.
Yeah, and maybe just to take one example, you mentioned vitamin D. Out of interest, over the last decade or so, if I asked you what percentage of children have low vitamin D when you look at their lab work for the first time, what would you say?
Well, I would say more than 75%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Even
of course,
with
that's bad for
supplementation.
it means that their immunity is going to be weakened, correct?
Yeah, vitamin D was just implicated as a thing involved in musculoskeletal health with zinc, magnesium, calcium, and other minerals. But of late, we also realized that it has an important role to play in immunity, and it is also going to play a role in memory consolidation. So it's not just having vitamin D, and because the child is growing, there is an increase in need. But even with good amounts of supplementation, vitamin D is a challenge in many kids to improve.
Got it. Okay, let's move on to the second test. This is one that I hear a lot of positive feedback from parents about, which is the organic acids test with a mycotoxin profile. So can you talk about what is we call it the OAT for short. What's so beneficial about the OAT?
Yeah. So once we clear the initial invasive lab tests, which involves blood prick, like it's really traumatic for the child. So the advanced testings are relatively non-invasive, because for this organic acid test, we need a urine sample. So it's easy, but it gives a lot of information about multiple systems. I call it the snapshot of every system in the body. It checks how the neurotransmitters are. It also checks whether there is bacterial fungal overgrowth. It tests for different ratios of neurochemicals, because dopamine then becomes norepinephrine to epinephrine. So how each type of neurochemical is processed, it gives information related to that aspect. It talks about amino acid sufficiency, vitamin mineral sufficiency. It also talks about detoxification pathways, whether they are good or not in a child. And most importantly, it talks about something called oxalate issue, which is very common in these kids. With a urine sample, we will be able to know what is going on in the body. It may not give more details of why and how. It only tells about what are the things that we need to address, and we need to probe more once we get this information. So this is going to help us in planning the second level of nutrition program and supplements, where we can then say, oh, the most common problem that we encounter is either hyperactivity, inattention, or increase in seizures, or too much of cramps and colicky pain. So that is not just coming because the child is having gassiness or bloating. It is coming from high oxalates in the diet, or the child has fungal overgrowth and the fungal colonies are secreting oxalates as a byproduct, which is poisoning the system. So, and there are many bacterial colonies, and Clostridia is one such organism which is going to secrete byproducts which look like neurochemicals, does that molecular mimicry, and the body thinks that there is too much of the neurochemical, but it is actually a lookalike substance from microbe. So it gives an idea of how the child's systems are affected, and help us to plan at the level of the biochemistry or cellular level, how to modulate these factors with supplements and diet.
Great. And I can see that people are joining us right now on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Go ahead and type your questions into the comments box, and I will ask them to Dr. Aravind, especially if you want to ask a question about health, nutrition, or lab testing. We will pose it to Dr. Aravind. So I'm gathering that probably very often when a family first comes for an initial appointment at Doman International, you're probably starting with a lot of the routine tests, like a routine blood test, and you're implementing certain changes into their diet, supplements, and some of the other things you mentioned. And then perhaps after 6 months, something like an organic acids test might be a nice addition. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yeah. And also, I think many parents ask this question: why can't we do all the available tests? Let's order all the 5, so that we'll get to know about everything. The problem with that is, of course, we will know that there are problems in different areas, but we may not be able to address all of them at once. To give an example, there can be certain nutritional deficiencies, and that may be coming from the absence of healthy microbiome, which usually turns food into usable nutrients. So once we correct that, the deficiencies may automatically correct. And
themselves.
we don't have give additional vitamins or minerals. And it is also practically impossible to give supplement for everything. To give an example, we had an Italian child who was on 23 supplements, and the child used to have projectile vomiting and sometimes blood stained because it was so forceful. The first thing we did was to stop all those 23 supplements, and the child started to have food without vomiting spells. So entire food tastes like pharmacy. It smells like it, and every meal just tastes and smells like a medicine, and no child will like it. So we want to keep a minimal amount of supplements, as minimal as possible. And we also do monthly protocols of, we'll start with gut cleanse, then add probiotics, then do this, then. So it is in a phasic manner, which is very important for these kids.
I appreciate you saying that, because sometimes it feels like certain people view supplements, because they're not medications, as almost being risk-free, or but as certain children have negative reactions to certain supplements. There might be ingredients in the supplements that are problematic. Sometimes there might be issues with combining specific supplements. All right, great. Can you just talk for a second? You mentioned, the organic acids test, you said with mycotoxin profile.
Yeah.
So the mycotoxins are looking at specifically at
fungal toxins,
fungal issues.
Yeah.
And that's in the gut, correct? Fungal
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So we also get questions like, we did a routine stool test which did not detect candida overgrowth. Why should we do this test? So the answer is a little bit complicated. So we're talking about fungal colonies. Of course, we all will live with the fungus in our body. It's an organism that we will coexist with. But the problem is when they overgrow and they start to take over the gut microbiome, and what stays and what doesn't. So that's when every problem starts. And what these mycotoxin fungal colonies do is they are going to send finger-like projections deep into the intestines, and they start to draw nutrients if that's not available for them through the food. And then they create cravings, specific cravings in children for simple sugars and easily digestible carbohydrates, because it's easy for them to use ready-made food. They don't have to process it. And the child then becomes really restless and picky eating, a lot of anxiety related problems, not because the child has those problems in the brain, but they are caused by the gut fungus. And these fungal colonies also have a crosstalk with some notorious opportunistic bacteria, and they develop something like an armor, Captain America. Mm-hmm. So we call it the biofilm. So the biofilm is a way to protect itself from invasion. So even if we give antifungals, that won't even touch the colonies because the biofilm is protecting them. So we have to break the biofilm, then expose the fungal colony and bacterial colony to the agent, then kill it and bind it with a binder and send it out. So it's a very complicated process. Mm-hmm. And not just that, sometimes even if there are moldy areas in the house, they release spores which can be inhaled, and through respiratory system it gets through the alveoli, enter the bloodstream, and they can stay in the body dormant for years, not days or weeks. And when the body's immune system is challenged, they'll pop up and start multiplying. That's why they are called opportunistic organisms. So the mycotoxin profile gives a specific information about what kind of fungal toxin the body has, and whether there are active fungal colonies, or is it just the toxins that are inhaled or exposed to that is causing problem. And the protocols differ totally, and it's going to be challenging, of course. And it is going to influence neurochemicals, the nutritional status of the child, and many different aspects. And that is a very important aspect that is tested with the OAT. If combined, I think it gives a better information of whether there is fungal colony or mycotoxin, and if yes, how much or to what degree it has affected different systems.
Mm. Well, for everyone who's joining us late, we're talking with Dr. Aravind Bagade about the top 5 lab tests for special needs children. It's not often we have the Director of Nutrition and Health here with us. So if you have any questions about your child, if you want to ask questions about diet, supplements, or lab testing, go ahead, type them into the comments box. Whether you're watching on Instagram, YouTube, or Facebook, we will answer your question. All right, Dr. Aravind, the third most important test, you mentioned stool testing before and how a routine stool test may not come up with helpful results all the time. So what's a comprehensive stool test provide for us?
Yeah, so this is mostly a PCR testing. So we'll not just see, the microscopic picture of, the routine stool test. It talks mostly about the microbiome diversity. So we have commensal organisms, which are the friendly microbes we live with. We have dysbiotic flora, which usually comes up when the healthy flora is not in good amounts. We have opportunistic flora, which includes the fungal colonies and other species. And there are potentially pathogenic or PP organisms, which are really notorious and cause problems in relation to health and nutrition. And there are protozoa and parasites. So it checks for the not just presence, but also gives a picture of what's the diversity and concentration of it. So it talks about H. pylori, everything literally in the gut, which can cause problems. And the second aspect it checks is inflammation markers like calprotectin. And the third is whether the gut is having a good immune system, or we call it the mucosal barrier functions. So is it appropriate? There's something called eosinophilic protein X. So it basically lets us know about whether there are dietary triggers of inflammation in the diet, which we need to avoid. It also talks about secretory IgA, which is the immune marker specifically found in the gut. It also talks about the glucuronidase activity, how much of the unwanted substances which are secreted through the bile into the stools is reabsorbed, and how do we prevent it. It also gives us an idea of sensitivity. Knowing that some organisms are present is only part of the picture. To what agent it is sensitive? Should we use an antibiotic? Is a probiotic, high strength probiotic, good enough, or should we use a botanical agent? So it talks about all of this, and it gives one important information of whether a child needs prebiotic, or if a prebiotic is actually bad for this child. Because if there is overgrowth of organisms, prebiotic is actually poisoning it, because it is causing even more overgrowth. Something like inulin that we use in NEMCHEC protocol.
Right.
It's used routinely, like everybody does, but sometimes it may actually be problematic. By increasing the number of organisms, they are actually competing for each other with regards to nutrients. So a comprehensive stool test will give a complete picture of the gut health, nutritional status, and helps us to start the healing journey from there. Because unless we change the gut, we cannot touch the brain or any other part.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning about the prebiotics, because for some time, and maybe still in certain places, inulin and other prebiotics were kind of discussed like a one size fits all. Like all children with special needs should be taking this. And I had heard about certain kids having very negative reactions to it. Other children really benefited from it. So helpful for you to say that there's no one size fits all here. All right. Well, if you're joining us late, feel free to type any questions into the comments box, and we will get to them in order. I'm picking Dr. Aravind's brain about lab tests. We're talking about the top 5 lab tests. So we've talked about the routine blood test, the organic acids test, and the comprehensive stool analysis. For number 4, we have the hair elements test. Can you talk to us about what's the hair elements test and why is it important?
Yeah. So hair element test specifically talks about 2 important things. One is called essential element representation, which are the minerals found in the body. And there is toxic element representation, which basically talks about heavy metals and unwanted elements in the body. So it's important because we can check the levels of these individually in blood, and it's going to be extremely expensive to do individual markers. And hair is the excretory organ for all of this. So measuring a hair shaft and finding out what's the concentration of these will let us know whether there is enough of mineral sufficiency in the body, or there are deficiency, or there is heavy metal toxicity that we need to address. And not more than 90% of the times we do see changes in this is a very important test, very easy. We just need like a teaspoon of hair sample sent to the lab, and we can get a ton of information on not just minerals and vitamins, minerals and toxic elements, but also the ratios. For example, zinc is considered to be the to-go supplement, especially when there is neurodevelopmental problem. So every parent will start the child on a zinc supplement, but it can also lead to copper depletion if it is in excess, because they compete with each other for space, and that's called competitive antagonism. So, but copper is very important for the production of many enzymes and hormones. So it's important for us to check and see whether the zinc to copper ratio is normal, whether the calcium magnesium ratio is normal. So these ratios matter. It's not just enough of, or there is extremely high amount of zinc. Oh, good job. We have given a good amount of supplementation. Yes, but what's the ratio of zinc to copper? Copper has really gone down to the minimal levels. So that is a lot of gap, and that creates the problem. And with hair element test, we also can get information on what kind of cleanse program we have to plan, because there can be high amounts of lead or methyl mercury or arsenic. And I have seen an interesting pattern of distribution in this hair test based on geographical areas. In the Americas, European Union, there's mostly methyl mercury and arsenic. In Indian populations, mostly lead and arsenic. And in other parts of the world, I see even things like strontium or cadmium, and aspects like that. And I was thinking, why such a picture, and what's so common about it? I think it's because in most Asian countries we use a lot of rice.
Right.
It's a common to have lead and arsenic in rice, whereas it may be mostly fish eating belt, where we see a lot of methyl mercury and other contaminants, and it has entered the ecosystem, and invariably it's going to be found in the body. So it is very much predictable, and it is mostly like a confirmatory test of what is going on. And there are many trace elements like lithium, which are never tested, but very important for kids who are on the ASD ADD spectrum. Lithium is a very important component which is often missed. So these tests give us a lot of information on planning supplements or even stopping supplements.
Got it. Yeah, you made me think that I know that in many East Asian countries where there's a lot of fish eaten, they've been finding for decades that children in those countries have very, very high mercury levels because they're consuming a lot of seafood. And one of the ways that they've tried to handle that is by raising what's considered the acceptable limit of mercury allowed for children, which of course is a terrible idea. Children don't need more mercury. So actually, I have a very practical question from Ania on Instagram, who says, for each of these recommended tests, do you have any specific lab that you prefer to use?
Well, it depends on where you are located. We at Doman International use Nordic labs because they offer kits which can be shipped to literally any part of the world, and then they also organize the written shipment collection at your doorstep, and it's very convenient and reliable. And there are also other labs like the Mosaic labs. There is Genova Diagnostics, and there are a couple of labs if you are in India or Europe that you can look for. But we do use Nordic labs most of the times because they offer all the tests that we want at a competitive price, and it's convenient for us.
Yeah, good question. Okay, let's move to the fifth and final lab test. For everyone who's joining late, we've talked about the routine blood test, the organic acids test with the mycotoxin profile, comprehensive stool analysis, hair elements test. And maybe before I show the fifth test, I just like to say that, the whole point of these tests are to help the child's day-to-day life. And I get to watch many of when our nutritionists teach, or when Dr. Aravind or Dr. Vinaya review lab testing, I get to watch their feedback to parents, right? And very often they first of all explain the findings of the lab test, which I feel is very, very important. It's amazing how many families come to Doman International who have never been explained the lab tests that they've done before. Parents will kind of come with these tests and will say, what did you hear from your doctor about this? And sometimes they'll just say nothing. And sometimes the scary thing is Dr. Aravind might even see something glaring from those reports, something quite substantially that's affecting the child that just for some reason got overlooked or neglected. So that's the first thing. I see Dr. Aravind and the nutritional team explaining the lab tests. What are the findings? What do they mean? Then we get into what should we do about it, right? Here are the new supplements we're recommending or recommending to stop. What are the dietary recommendations? What are the changes in the child's environment that we're recommending? So it's important to understand you'll never just be told, hey, start vitamin B. It doesn't work like that. Yeah. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think, recently I was talking to a family. In the family, the child is supposed to have a heart surgery soon. And as a part of it, they did routine blood test. And, there were a lot of parameters in the white blood cell count. There was very low amounts of almost every individual white blood cell type. And I just asked the parent out of curiosity, what did the doctor say about the labs? And she said nothing. They just handed over, the results to us and said, these are your labs. And I asked, is everything okay? And he said, yeah, everything is fine. I don't see any problems. That was shocking to me, because one of the problems that we face after the surgery is that there's going to be, some degree of steroids, antibiotics, and whatnot that are all used on the child. With a low immune system that's not being, explained to parents, the chances of getting, it's mostly like inducing more of an immunocompromised state when the immunity is already low, and not working on improving that before planning the surgery. So that, kind of scares me, because these parents deserve to know what the labs actually mean. And just doing it mechanically, like we call it the matching the ill with the pill. So you see only in the book, this goes out of range, prescribe this. And until it goes out of range, the doctor is not supposed to worry or tell the parent that this is going to be a problem. Okay, until now there was no problem. Today it got worse, so now is the problem. I can prescribe, but there's no proactive steps in preventing things, or
Yeah,
that's surprising.
it's wild. Okay, well, if you're joining us late, go ahead and type your questions into the comments box, and we will answer. If you have any questions about nutrition, diet, supplementation, or lab testing, we will take it on. So the fifth and final test now I do want to say it's not that we just do 5 tests at Doman International. We actually have many more than that, but we're talking about the top 5 recommended lab tests. This one is actually relatively new to me, the neurotransmitter profile. Could you talk a bit about who are the kinds of children that we might utilize a neurotransmitter profile with, and how does it help?
Yeah. So once we review the baseline labs, and then we check the organic acids and see which systems are affected, then we'll go into the depths of why the system is affected. If there are too much of toxin load, or stuff like that, where is this toxin coming from? Okay, there is a lot of bacterial fungal load, let's do a mycotox profile, and then let us do a hair element test to see whether there are also micronutrient deficiencies or heavy metal toxicity. So we do all of that, we address that, and there is some subset of population who still have problems with behavior, mood, anxiety, attention span, seizures, and many different aspects. So the next thing to know is, how is the neurotransmitter status right now? Because we have now tried to address many of the external factors, from environment to diet to inflammation and gut brain axis, microbiome, all of that. Now, what else is remaining? The next layer would be just to directly go and check how the neurotransmitters are, because most of the neurochemicals are synthesized in the gut, not in the brain. That's why gut is called the second brain. So we have addressed the microbiome related problems. Why is there still problems in terms of these cognitive things going on with the child? So neurotransmitter functions require something called methylation status. So methylation is a process by which the body handles every function. It's mostly like an SOP or an instruction manual given to every cell and say, okay, if there is a damage to the cell, this is how you are going to repair. So when the toxins build up on a daily basis, this is how you are going to clean it. And if the cell is not recovering, you have to kill this apoptosis, kill the cell and replace it with something which is not inflammatory. Or this is how you are going to let the nutrients in. This is how the nutrients are going to be used. So next question is to know how is the methylation status. So before we go, we need a baseline of how the neurotransmitters are, because many of these chemicals, like maybe dopamine, then becomes norepinephrine, then becomes epinephrine. So it is a chain that is mostly going from A to B to C. And if the urine test, this is a urine test, says that there is extremely high amounts of dopamine, but the final products of dopamine is very low, that means the cycle is stuck somewhere. And we need to check the intermediaries and see where it is stuck and what cofactor is deficient. If there are genetic problems, how do we upregulate or downregulate the genes? So it gives a lot of information about or direct information about what's going on with the neurochemicals. Is there too much of certain neurochemical? Is there very little amount of certain chemicals? Or how are the ratios of the excitatory and inhibitory neurochemicals? Are they having a healthy conversation, or is one overpowering the other? And it helps us to plan, modify the diet. If there are a lot of excitatory chemicals, then we might reduce excitotoxins and reduce glutamate and many other things in the diet. We might add GABA to the supplementation. So there are a lot of things which we can do based on neurotransmitter profile. And it also gives us a hint of whether we should go into the depths of methylation profile and genetic panel further. So it's like a starting point to probe in that direction as well.
Besides dopamine, you mentioned dopamine and neuroepinephrine. What are other neurochemicals that the test is looking at?
Yeah, so it also checks the serotonin metabolites, which is very important. And the byproducts matter, the HPA, homovenilic acid, or the intermediaries. We do have indicating the enzymatic functions in between. Commonly in genetic terms, we use the terminologies MTHFR, COMT, MAO, monoamine oxidase. So these intermediary steps and the byproducts will be checked there. So it basically takes us through the chemical processes one by one with intermediary testing. And it also gives us a hint of whether there is too much of adrenaline or cortisol. Check for that, because sometimes if the sleep-wake cycle is not normal, child is waking up early in the morning, like 3 a.m., not going to bed, and the entire day the child is extremely tired but unable to sleep. Maybe there is cortisol or too much of adrenaline driving these things. So have a look at it. So it gives information on these aspects as well, which is very interesting. And there is also another test other than neurotransmitter profile. It's called the Dutch panel. So it's even more comprehensive, where it checks estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, the byproducts, and try to link whether they are going to an oxidative pathway or healthy pathway. And we plan the neurobasic panel or the neurological or neurochemical panel depending on the child's age. If it is a teen, then we may suspect influence of sex hormones to some degree. We may want to check and see if they are influencing. If it is a baby, we may want to just check the basic panel. There is neuro advanced panel as well, which checks even more parameters. So basically depends on the child's age and condition.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, those different neurochemicals, I think for most of us who aren't experts, we've even heard of serotonin and dopamine and cortisol. Serotonin, I think most people think of in terms of, depression or mood. Dopamine, connected with, very often gets talked about in addiction, right? Because, and cortisol, stress hormone. By the way, I appreciate you mentioning that about high cortisol can lead to waking up at 3 a.m. because I recently went through, the process of buying a home. And for about a week, every morning I woke up at 3 a.m. And so hearing that probably it was my cortisol was high, because once the process was done with, I slept fine again. So, I'm guessing based on my basic knowledge of these neurochemicals, very often you're probably using the neurotransmitter test with children with mood issues, behavioral issues, hyperactivity,
Aggression,
addictive behaviors, anxiety, OCD. Yeah. OCD is one often a lot of parents ask about, obsessive kind of compulsive behaviors. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. That's very helpful. Okay. So we have a question here from Annabella, who has been on our program for quite some time. And Annabella is asking, how can we assess methylation deficiencies? Dr. Aravind,
so there is a specific panel for that. So first thing, we need to know whether there is a hint for methylation problems that can come from OAT. It can also come from neurobasic panel. And the second aspect is to go to a methylation profile. So it checks for different analytes like the S-adenosylmethionine, homocysteine. So again, it is a cycle where there are multiple steps, 10, 15 steps, and there are 3 subcycles in the methylation cycle where it ends up recycling methionine, it ends up as the folate cycle or production of glutathione. So the methylation panel checks for all the 3 and analytes and gives us an idea of whether the individual is having a good methylation status. If not, whether it's an under-methylation or over-methylation. It's basically a term we use to categorize based on whether the machinery is upregulated or downregulated. There's no such thing medically as a diagnostic term, but it helps us understand whether a child is having a downregulated pathway, methylation pathway, or upregulated one.
Got it. By the way, we've just gotten 3 great back-to-back questions on Instagram, so I'll go through them one by one. And I think they very much reveal how many parents who come onto our program are incredibly knowledgeable about nutrition and testing. So Anya is asking, regarding the neurotransmitter tests, would it be recommended to also evaluate and/or correlate myelin quantity and formation and glia cell health, for example?
Yes, this is one of the best questions. I'll give the first prize.
You get top prize, Anya, for best question. Good job.
I think it makes sense. Once we do the neurobasic panel, then the next question is to address those deficiencies or too much of neurochemicals. And depending on the response of the child, it makes sense to then work on knowing whether this is coming from an impairment in the myelination or the glial cells or the supportive cells, or what is contributing to this. And that can be really a great way to, or a comprehensive way of viewing it, not just looking at neurochemicals, but also why is that happening. And
Perfect. And again, these are questions, Dr. Aravind, from parents. You'll probably even recognize some of their names, but these are all parents who have been on our program for a few years at least. Kalisha is saying, wow, we were just talking about the labs. Maya's liver enzymes were elevated. The neurologist said it was normal for the meds, I guess the meds she was on. Dr. Aravind had us use milk thistle and it fixed it. Liver and brain are connected.
Yeah,
You want to talk
this
about
is, yeah. So the consensus is that there are some medications, say Keppra, for example, or Sabril, which are known to impact liver functions, because once their function is over, there is a pharmacokinetic pathway where the chemical is then degraded and just dumped in the liver. The liver concentrates it with the bile and excretes with this, the byproducts along with the stools. But this process is going to be a little bit painful for the liver. And when we do liver function tests, we see that certain liver enzymes are elevated. And the first question that comes to mind is your child on medication? And the parent would say, yeah, they are on 3, 4, 5 anti-epileptics. And that's the reason the child's liver enzymes are elevated. But then just telling that, yes, this can elevate the liver enzyme is not a solution. It's just
Right,
we are knowing that is the case. So unless we support the liver, it is going to, with time, become weaker, because liver is the largest metabolic organ in the body. It has so many functions, from detoxification to, it determines whether my metabolism is proper or not. That is the organ along with thyroid gland which regulates it. So if a medication is affecting, then we'll think of, are there safer alternatives, or are there ways in which we can reduce the dose, or at least support the liver with some supplements or dietary changes. And it's very important that, many parents do realize this. I might study a little bit of every disease, but the parent of particular child's diagnosis, they would have done a PhD in that. They'll study everything possible and educate themselves about what this condition is and what best we can do. So I feel sad when the physicians just brush off these questions and say, I'm the expert, just nothing will happen, just go.
Well, yeah, and it's such an interesting thought process to say, well, we know the liver enzymes are increased because of the medication. Well, we just have to live with it. And it's good to understand a root cause of why something is happening, but then you need to take the extra step to say, okay, now that we know the root causes, there's something we can do about it. It doesn't help the child at all to just say, well, it's because of this.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got another great, here's a question from Yosipa, who's saying, hello, nice to hear you all. I'm interested in leucovorin. By the way, Dr. Aravind, when we decided to do this, I knew we would get a question about leucovorin. That's why I didn't even ask you myself. Dr. Aravind and I were actually talking about this earlier today. Autism and epilepsy due to cerebral folate deficiency. Dr. Richard Fry's research has just come to Europe. Thank you, Dr. Aravind. So, Dr. Aravind, leucovorin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think initially we had folic acid, which is commonly used as vitamin B9, by the way, available in diet and also in different supplements. And at some stage, we realized that some children will have methylation problems. They cannot process the folic acid as such. So we need to give the methylated forms of B vitamin. So there is methyl tetrahydrofolate, there is methylcobalamin, B12 that are used. It helped some kids, but again, it was not an answer for everything. Some kids actually got worse with it. And when there was research done to know why that happens, and they realized that when we use methylated forms of supplements, they are methyl donors, which means once they come into the body, they're going to donate methyl groups. And if at all the child is exposed to it, then excitatory neurochemicals like acetylcholine and stuff, they are really going to get loads of excitement. They don't know how to handle. The child would just jump around the entire day, cannot relax, and some kids even have aggression and socially difficult situations, both for the child and parents. So if a child has a picture which is mostly, kind of methylation related problem, it became a challenge whether we should use methylated forms or we should not use methylated forms. So then the scientists started researching about what other confounders we have, what is involved which we are missing here. Then they realized that there is something called cerebral folate receptors. So making folate or folic acid available to the body and brain is one aspect. The second is whether it is crossing the blood brain barrier. The usual folic acid we are using as supplements may not be. Methylated forms to a great degree, yes, but in some of these children, especially in ASD, ADD, ADHD, or maybe even intractable drug-resistant epilepsies, there is some degree of autoimmunity involved where the body develops autoantibodies against the body's own tissues. In this case, it would be the folate receptors in brain, which means now the receptors are being destroyed by these antibodies. And there can be two types of that. One is called the blocking, and the other is something which replaces, where instead of folic acid, the antibody goes and sits there, or the antibody directly blocks the folate from going and getting attached to the receptor. So now at this situation, leucovorin definitely has a role because it is completely processed in directly usable form. It crosses the blood-brain barrier easily, and in receptor problems, it's going to be a great way to bypass that process and directly touch the receptor and do the function. Now, again, this is not a complete solution for every child. It has helped many children with betterment in speech, betterment in behavior, social regulation, aspects around it, cognitive functions and seizures, but there are more layers to it, and it is again not a one size fit for all.
Mm-hmm. And you'll usually do, going back to the topic of lab tests, you'll usually do a test before determining if the child should get leucovorin, right?
We do specific test called FRAT test, folate receptor antibody test, and only if we see that there are receptor related problems do we then use the leucovorin, and we start from very minimal dose of 400 to 800 micrograms, and then gradually improve to up 1 to 5 milligrams per kg body weight per day, a maximum of 50 milligrams in a day. So it again depends on whether there is antibody count or not, and what type of it, and starts very slowly because it can again be too much.
Are leucovorin and folinic acid the same thing?
Folinic acid and leucovorin are the same thing.
The same thing. Okay. All right. Very good. Yeah, and actually, it's interesting because Dr. Aravind and I were discussing a child earlier today who actually has had good progress from folinic acid while on the nutrition program. But again, there was a process to decide if that was the right supplement. It's not a one size fits all. And, leucovorin, I want to say last year it became a kind of national conversation in the US because the Department of Health and Human Services came out and announced it could be helpful for autism treatment. And unfortunately, it was very much treated as a political issue in the US. So basically half of people saying it's a cure for everything, and the other half of people saying it will kill you, don't take it, it's evil. And there was really out, at least in the public, no serious conversation about folinic acid. We've known about folinic acid for probably 15 years. So I was happy to hear it got attention. But I mean, I remember us doing FRAT tests probably 15 years ago with kids for the first time. So it's not something which is new to us, but I'm glad it's getting talked about. Okay. Let's see. I think, we are just about out of time. Dr. Aravind, I didn't want to end our interview without talking for a second about a book that you wrote called the Doman Cookbook. It's a book you wrote with your wife, Dr. Vinaya, who's also a member of the Doman International Nutrition Team, and another colleague, Alex Del Rosario. Can you just talk for a second about the Doman Cookbook and how it could be helpful for families?
Yes, absolutely. So we used to give nutritional recommendations to parents at Doman International, and at some stage, I think it was in Italy, when Morgan and I, we were talking about this, and she said, "Why don't you write a cookbook?" Because many parents will not have a good deal of knowledge about what is nutrition, or why nutrition is important for kids with special needs. And we said, okay, that's interesting. When we started writing, it took nearly a year or so. So the cookbook talks about basics of nutrition. So it talks about what is actually nutrition, and nutrients, and what are the sources, healthy, good sources of it, like a healthy shopping cart. And then there is a section which talks about foods to different stages and challenges. There are foods that can be tried with children who cannot chew well. There are foods that are for toddlers and babies who can chew well. And there are foods which are keto friendly. There are foods which are tube fed, feed friendly. So we try to organize the book in such a way that we gave specific codes for each recipe and say, this is a recipe which is good both for children who can't chew and also who are on a pig feeding. So it has nearly like 150 recipes or so, and it is also again a guideline. So we have written recipes which can be again customized in different ways. If we use one grain, that can also be replaced with another grain if the child is intolerant to. So we give also recommendations on how do we deal with such challenging situations. And even if your child is on a keto diet or a modified Atkins, how can we still do the Doman method with modifications? And there are groups of recipes specific for the Mediterranean diet, Asian diet, European diet. So we try to include as much as possible, different categories of foods. And I think it should be a book that every parent, Doman parent, should have as a guide when they are when they want to know whether something is okay or not. You can open the book and check the table of healthy foods or healthy shopping cart and say, okay, this is okay to use, in what forms, how to reduce oxalate load. A lot of information that can be really helpful to get started.
Wonderful. So the Doman Cookbook is available right now on Amazon all over the world, and also as an ebook. So yeah, you can find it there. Colleen, could you finish off, just for anyone who's brand new to Doman International and the Doman Method, just talking about how people can reach out to the organization and learn more?
Absolutely. So the best way to get in touch with us is to send an email. My email is info@domaninternational.org. That is my direct email. You can also message me, again, directly at country code 1-814-232-8668. I have WhatsApp, I have Signal, I have Telegram, or text. And you can always send a direct message through our social media as well, if that's the easiest thing, because I see all of those too. And we have lots of information to share about our appointments, of course, but really just about how to get started, our books and everything else.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, Dr. Aravind, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was a pleasure. All the very best to all the parents.
Colleen, thank you too. And for everyone next week, unfortunately, we will not be having a show next week at this time. We will be taking that next week off, but then we'll be back the following week. So just wanted to let you all know, and look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. And reach out and talk to Colleen if you want to learn more. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.